special guests. We have over here on the left the Director of Public Works and Utilities, Mr. Bradford, and then 3 of the 5 city councilors in Gunnison. So this is Councilman Schwartz, Councilwoman Morrison, and Councilman Ferguson. And I'm going to start us off with some very basic questions about what's at stake with next week's decision, and then I'll turn it over to you guys for some questions too. Okay? So my first question is, and sometimes these questions might be better suited for Mr. Bradford, but please jump in and feel free to interrupt my questions too if there's something that you think is critically important. I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of a sense of the general structure of the city utility, where we get our power from, what kind of fuels we use, what kind of relationship we have with mean, some of those basics.
Sure. We are a local controlled public power utility, so people like me report to the city manager and city council members may make recommendations for policies, but these guys direct us employees as to what direction the citizens have given them for their wishes, and then we go out and provide information back to these folks and ask for their direction, and then we are charged with that responsibility of seeing that those policies are followed, if you will, throughout the city. We, the city, have about 4,200 electric meters. We do serve electric power outside the city limits. If you're familiar with Gold Basin Road and some of the others, it was from the old days when the city of Gunnison was the only electric supplier in this area before the REAs came in. So we still do that. We have 2 separate power contracts. We do buy power from others. We don't generate any power. We buy power from Western Area Power Administration. It's federal hydropower. That, depending on a water year, accounts for approximately 28 to 30% of all of our city purchase power is hydro generated. Again, depending upon the water years in the west, not just the Mesa Reservoir. So therefore, we obviously have other power to buy. We contract for power through the Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska. It's located in North Platte. I go to North Platte for meetings a lot of times, but they're in Lincoln, Nebraska. Serve 67 municipalities in 4 states: Iowa, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado, just municipals. So that is makes up the other power contract that we do. There's multiple generation resources within the mean mix. Coal is still part of that mix. A small amount of hydro through some various contracts, a very small amount of nuclear generated power, and some wind power. Gunnison overall mix is, depending on a year again, will be approximately 55% of all of our resources are non-carbon emitting generation resources. So if you follow that, that's pretty good. It's not as good as 100%, but it's pretty good. Western, through you students, you also purchase extra power, and I forget the program where you pay, is it $20-something in your registration fees, additional to purchase additional wind power and wind energy attributes or renewable energy credits for the university. So the university standing alone is more in the, I did this past spring for Professor Dr. Coop, so I don't remember the exact numbers, but I want to say around 90% non-carbon emitting resources for the university with the extra that you guys buy. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Historically, moving the conversation into renewable energy and eventually to distributed generation, can any of you tell us anything about the history, the types of policies that have shaped renewable energy in town?
Demand. If you turn the clock back 2 centuries, when Gunnison was first formed, we generated our own power. And so water came from the Gunnison River via the town ditch, and the big building at the far west end of Virginia Avenue was the power plant, and it burned coal provided from the mines in Crested Butte. And so it was, an entirely community-based economy. And that's how Gunnison got into distributing energy to a bigger circle than just the city limits. And that was, I don't remember what year they abandoned that. It was like the 50s?
Early 50s.
Yeah, I think early 50s is my recollection too. And started buying power, and the Western Area Power Authority, WAPA, became a huge focal point because the federally provided hydro power is the least expensive power that we can get. And so a lot of times cost drives the policy decisions that council makes over time. And the WAPA power, they really didn't ask us if we wanted the dams or not, but we have them. And even though technically the electricity comes from all the dams in the west, in reality, I would say, 95% of it comes from Blue Mesa. And if Blue Mesa goes offline, we have a problem. So when it comes to a public policy decision, cost has been, and availability have been driving factors. And I'd like to point out that Tex just put together his kind of annual review of where do we stand, and Gunnison remains the least expensive electric resource in Colorado. That you cannot get electric utility rates lower than ours anywhere in Colorado. And so by prudently developing policies over a long period of time, we've been able to create a benefit for the people in our community. And one of those policy decisions is this contract with the Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska. And whoever came up with an acronym that spells MEAN, and for some people maybe it is true that it's mean people that charge a lot for electricity, but not us. That we signed a 30-year contract to purchase through this pool, and that allows us to have long-term fixed rates. And so while we continue, and Tex serves on the board of directors for me and some of the policy generating committees, and they've continued to negotiate policy type decisions at the direction of council, for example, to allow more locally produced energy. If you want to put a wind turbine on your house, or if you want to put solar panels on your house, we are still limited by contract, but we can do far more than we actually have. So people choosing to generate their own energy is one of the things that we've been actively pursuing as a policy decision. And so Tex, maybe you pick it up and carry that forward.
Yeah, and to further on, a few years back, Stu was on council. I don't believe Council Morrison and Council Schwartz were on the council at the time, but they were certainly part of the community. There was a local group. I see one of the participants, Butch Clark over here, participated in that along with some city staff, some city council members, and ultimately an energy action plan was adopted by city council. I'm sorry, I don't remember the year. It would have been, I've been there about 22 years, so I got to remember back on the years when things were adopted. But 6 or 7 years ago, I would say, when that energy action plan was adopted, with the intent of moving forward with reducing our carbon footprint as it relates to not only the electricity, but other things within the community. So we have some target goals. We have moved forward with that by replacing street lights, if you will, with LED street lights. Less wattage, less kilowatt hours, less generation. So that's still a part that you guys will see in our electric budget from time to time, where we continue to replace street lights with those lower use type technologies. Along with that, probably 5 years back, council approved and we increased our purchases of a higher price resource, but of wind energy that we are connected to our grid that comes into Gunnison. So at our citizens and our council's will, we contracted for additional wind power, and it's probably in the 10-12% of our total mix range now is grid-connected wind.
Where is
We
that
do some other
generated?
things. I'm sorry?
Excuse me, where is that generated?
Most of it is in Nebraska. The power pool, Mean, owns a very small wind generation plant in Kimball, Nebraska. The bulk of it, though, comes from contracted wind farms in different locations.
Okay.
But primarily, they're located in Nebraska.
And maybe if you're not familiar with the concept, it's really important, at least to this lay person, the grid is kind of like magic. That there are all these wires in a mesh all over the country that deliver electrical energy. And they're all kinds of different voltages and different styles, and you'll see, anything from almost a single line down a tree to this great big overhead power transmission lines that are extremely high voltage and high energy. And to a layperson, at least to me, it seems like you can more or less put energy into that system at any location, and somebody else can buy it and take it out at another location. But then, of course, there's loss and the technical part.
It's similar to a water pipe. If you have a water pipe, you can see water, you can't see the electricity moving. But if you had 5 different water wells putting water into a water pipe, 10 different communities taking water out of that, do you know which well the water came out of? Because it all mixes. But we contract for that. It does go to the grid, so theoretically we are getting that power delivered to us. It reduces in most cases, it reduces the coal generation to that grid because we're putting the wind generation to it, or hydro. The 2 large transmission lines that Stu mentions coming into Gunnison, you might see them if you get up in the mountains, just a little north of town. Comes out of Blue Mesa Reservoir, moving east to Gunnison, and then on over to Salida area. So those belong to Western Area Power Administration. We pay a fee to WAPA or have that power delivered to us here in the valley. There's a fee associated with those transmission lines. So if you see one of Gunnison's electric bills, they're very complicated because of all the different entities, the different charges, the different ways that happens. Most of the time, these guys don't want me to read those things to them. They want me to give them the information, and then they make the decision, so they'll have an understanding, but I don't think they want to spend the time to look at it. If they do, they certainly have that option.
And
First time.
a couple of you had mentioned the 30-year contract with Mean. When did that begin?
The first contract was back in about 1989 or 90. And Stu, at the time, it was a 20-year contract. As the years have gone by, we, the city, have increased that, not renewed it, extended it, to get guaranteed power up into the future. The current contract now is 2042.
Okay.
For that resource. Our WAPA contract, our hydropower contract, is typically 20 years at a time. We renewed that in 2004 for 20-year time period, so to 2024. At the time, we lost part of our hydropower allocation. The federal government required that power through Western Area Power, hydropower off the federal dams, more of it be available to Native American tribes, if you will. So they reduced us about 7% of what we were getting prior to that time. Since that time, we've been in a drought, almost ongoing. We've had a year or two that was better than others. So WAPA, therefore, cannot provide us our contracted amount in kilowatt hours of hydro-generated power at all times. So that throws another difficulty to our power resources, and we, the city, then through Mean, under separate agreements, buy power to make up that difference, if you will.
Did I get that acronym right? Western Area Power Administration?
That is correct.
Great. And Councilman Ferguson, I think you mentioned some pros and cons of these long-term contracts. with power generators. I was curious if any of you could tell us a little bit more about why that makes sense for the city to go into a pretty long-term contract and some of the either limitations or obstacles that it presents.
Sure.
Oh,
Take the
go
first
right ahead.
round and pass the baton again. Obviously, one of the benefits is that we know where our energy is coming from for a long time, and it's a fluctuating market. The current drought in the West, if we weren't in a contract, might very well result in higher prices for buying the electricity. And so we know where it's coming from, and we pretty much know what it's going to cost. And people like Tex have negotiated incredibly good value for us. The downside is that, and that now this is more of a public policy decision, we've had a number of community groups that have worked with the city and the council to try to find ways to reduce our carbon footprint. And can we find a way to migrate away from coal-generated electricity to renewable resources? And that is, we're in a contract, so that limits some of the things we can do. But we've been negotiating with Mean and the other customers of Mean to try to find more flexibility and pursue more renewable resources. So that's a policy decision that's being made by boards all the way across the country, I think. The downside is we give up a little flexibility in order to secure a future supply and a really low price. And so there is a juggling act. It is a community policy decision.
When the power plants are built, they're, as you can imagine, millions of dollars. And what we look at is we get so much hydro-generated power, we have certain amounts. Wind only generates electricity when the wind blows at the correct miles per hour, whether it's too high or too low. Solar, when the sun shines. So you guys wouldn't be very happy if we just did those, because when that's not generating, then we're going to be browned out or blacked out. We're not going to have any power. So it's some method we need backup power, and we have to have it on demand so you don't notice it when it happens. Coal has been that for many, many years. It's transitioning to natural gas in a lot of cases, which produces about half as many pounds of CO2 per kilowatt hour as coal. Our resources in coal through the plants that we are involved with generate about 2.2 pounds of CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour generated. Natural gas is about 1 pound. So that's the trades-off. Natural gas will probably be a little more expensive as we go forward. Right now it's not too bad. But when we build the plants, or we buy into those plants to get these contracts, so we'll have a guaranteed source of power, we have to bond for the monies to build the plants. So those bonds will be 30 years, 40 years, 20 years, depending upon how it's done. It's a loan. So those bonds, then we, to get the power at those guaranteed prices, and that we get it, and it can't go anywhere else with fluctuations, then we, the city, in this case, sign a contract that says we're in for the life of the bonds. We got to pay off the unit and all the other players that are involved. So that's kind of how that one works. Stu mentioned renewables, and I think you did too, distributed generation earlier, if you want to delve into that one. Distributed generation is mostly thought of as solar generation. There's others, but it could be hydro, it could be wind. But as we move forward with our contracts that we have with Mean, because we have to stay in long enough to pay these bonds, currently they state we can't buy any power from anyone else but them after our WAPA allocations. So those become difficult. Now in recent times, laws have changed and they're different in different states, so it becomes difficult to manage. So with our power pool, which is a little different than an independent owned. The city council appoints a director, a representative to be the director for the city for the city of Gunnison to me. I'm currently that person and have been for a number of years. The city's council's option as to who that person may be. They appoint that. I then
And
service.
Mr. Bradford, let me interrupt you just for a
Oh, go ahead.
moment, just so we have a sense for Gunnison's share in that decision-making body. How many other representatives are there like you?
There are 60, I believe there's 66 or 7.
Okay.
Typically, we'll see 35 people, directors show up at a quarterly meeting to make those
Okay.
decisions. There are internal committees to resolve issues with recommendations back to the directors as a whole. I'm currently serving on a 9-person committee to address distributed generation and how the power pool and how our contracts can work with that, as opposed to saying, no, you can't just go out and do it. We have a place in Iowa right now that wants to do a large solar farm. By contract, they cannot do so.
Okay.
So the struggle is 4 states with 4 different sets of laws by their states, and even some federal concern. So we've just begun that process. Had our first meeting just this week before last, I believe. So I'll be continuing with that as long as council has me as the director, to participate in that and see what we can do to be a little more flexible with our contracts and still meet our financial obligations for the group as a whole.
And I might go on to explain just a little bit about why Tex is such an incredibly valuable person for our community. He started out many, many years ago as an electric lineman in Texas, I believe, and hence the nickname, and gained an incredible amount of experience in power distribution, power management. The city of Gunnison hired him to be the superintendent of our electric utility. That's what brought him to Gunnison. And then the opportunity came along where he became the public works director, which oversees the electric utility. But that background and experience is just priceless for the people of Gunnison, because his breadth of knowledge of the electric industry is far greater. I mean, without him, we would be contracting with some third party, because Matt and Leah and I simply don't have the expertise or knowledge to evaluate the kinds of things that go on and make good decisions. We are really good at listening to the community and what does our community want and need, and then Tex is really good at translating that. Okay, here are the kinds of contract opportunities, and how do we make that a reality? So his contribution to our community can't be understated.
All right, switching gears a little bit into the specifics of what's up for debate on Tuesday, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of decisions might be changed? What are the proposed changes to the utility?
Sure.
You go ahead.
The time of day rate is what is one of the changes that we're proposing for council to consider next Tuesday, along with our wind and solar policy as well. So we're looking at two separate considerations for council to consider. The time of day rate is an option for our electric customers, and in the past it's been for residential customers only. Commercial customers weren't able to take advantage of that if they were to choose to do so. As we have had about 10, 12 years of data to look at and how that's worked for us with our residential customers, we believe that it's time to move, we as staff believe it's time to move forward and allow our commercial customers to move in and take advantage of a time of day rate if they so choose and if it will work for them. It's not going to be a mandatory thing. If you're familiar with it, certain hours of the day we peak with our largest usage of power. In Gunnison, it's largely attributed to our residential load because we don't have large industry, so we don't have plants going on here that use massive amounts of electricity. University is probably one of our biggest single customers, if you will, because of the size. Then you might go to the grocery stores, the hospital. So that's our larger customer, commercial-based folks. We peak between 2 times a day, like 5 in the morning till 9 or 10 in the morning. I have to read my notes to see what I have in the hours. And then again from 5 or so in the afternoon till 9 or 10 at night. So it's when people are getting up in the morning, they go to work, kind of falls off, and then they get home at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, lights come on, showers, washing clothes, whatever the case may be. So we have peak times. From a financial standpoint, if we had enough folks that went on the time of day rate and used electricity during those times, it would reduce that peak in kilowatts, therefore reducing our cost, because we have to pay based on the maximum demands. We have to pay a cost for that. So if that's lower, then we pay less. It takes a lot. We haven't had enough participation, quite frankly, to make a big impact on that locally. Probably a little bigger on a regional scale. So what that can do from an environmental standpoint is reduce the need for peaking units to be built, particularly coal or diesel or whatever. So it can have those implications as well. If your person's lifestyle, it can accommodate those hours, then it can be worthwhile to you. If not, it can cost you more. The power is less expensive. I think our normal rate is a little over 7 cents a kilowatt hour for a residential customer, 7.5 cents or so. Off-peak times, you'd be less than 4 cents. On peak, if you're using power, then you're going to be more like 10 cents. So it can backfire on you if you don't have an alternate heat source, if you will. We don't have a lot of air conditioning load in Gunnison, but at home, if you have electric heat, you'll need something to back, a different heat source during those peak times if it's going to work for you. If you're a person that's both of you work, a wife, husband work, a couple work, is washing clothes, running the clothes dry, or those types of things, is that really going to work for you during those off-peak times or not? So it's something to spend some time to think about it if you consider going on that road. We think that we'd like to offer it to our community as a choice and an option for them to choose.
Now, picking that up and going to what does City Council care about this, we're not looking so much as how much does it cost to buy those kilowatt hours, but what is the energy cost to our citizens, our customers? And Matt and Leah may want to join in about how lower electric utility rates can affect economic development. And if we're trying to attract business, does that work for them?
Yes, and it's important. I think part of this right now is adding the time of day rate for commercial ventures. And we recently passed an ordinance which allows marijuana grow facilities, and time of day rates for those folks might make a lot of sense given that they are heavy electric users, and they might be able to actually reduce their bottom line costs should they choose to turn their lights on between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. So that opens up the door for commercial entities rather than just residential entities to take advantage of this. I find the options for our citizens, or the choice for our citizens to do this interesting given technological advances that we're seeing. One of the things that's really interesting to me is the new battery that Elon Musk's company has put out that works as you charge it during off-peak hours and then utilize the stored energy during on-peak hours. That could certainly reduce everybody's electric bills, which is a great advantage, and works as a backup generator for the home as well. I think as we see more technology like that come to the marketplace, on or off peak demand metering is going to become more and more important to save both citizens and industry dollars.
And going off of what Matt's speaking to, the education piece for our community too. If we, once this is passed, if it is passed, educating the public, hey, did you know about this? Commercial businesses who are possibly looking at coming into the area, educating them and letting them know this is available, as well as things like this, new battery, new technology. So yeah, education is a huge piece.
Any specific questions on this particular proposed change before we move on to the second, about time of day rates?
Have any other places, like I believe Atlanta uses this, the peak hour rates and everything, have any places offset it so much that it kind of lowers those peaks to where it's no longer an effective?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Some years ago, some of the REAs, are you familiar with REAs, cooperatives? They're typically the...
Rural Electric Associations?
Yeah, thank you. They offered a time of day rate, and they had such a large load with their farmers in Nebraska with irrigation, electric pumps, that the farmers said, gosh, I'm gonna make those kind of savings, I can water at night. What the heck? So many did it. What it did was backfire on the utility, and all it did was reverse the peak. So the peak became at night instead of during the day.
Wow.
Now they had to come in and say, and eat a little crow, and say, this isn't working, because now all of a sudden we didn't save any money because our peaks didn't get lowered, and we've given you this great deal. So they had to reevaluate and change. So yeah, it's something that to keep track of.
And on that note, it seems to me that from the perspective we're coming from, an environmental perspective, wanting to address the cost of our electricity and perhaps even reduce it, I wonder whether you struggle with the issue of the utility, or the city rather, wanting to sell more electricity, and perhaps that goal conflicting with some of the environmental goals that you've also mentioned.
We, as a city, have not had that discussion. We need to make enough money to pay our linemen, buy the equipment, keep the system up, make upgrades, those sorts of things, pay our bill to the electric. And council can jump in here. My direction over the years has not been to go out, it's called an enterprise fund, but we're still a non-profit. This always drives me crazy. How can you be a non-profit? Because you are making money. We have to make money to sustain the system. Have a reserve fund to go out and replace the substation. Some very expensive equipment should one fail. Maybe growth occurs. We have something to look forward at. But as far as these guys telling me you need to make $10 million a year, no. It's do a healthy thing, and they set that. When we give them the budget, they're looking at what we're projecting as staff and what we're doing for expenses, and they see how much we're estimating that's going to go up into a reserve fund, and we have a target number for that this council will either agree with or not. Now, currently in the electric, our target's $1 million in a reserve fund, with the understanding that fluctuates up and down. It could be 800,000, it could be up to $1 million for wherever these guys are comfortable with. So that's what sets our rates.
And I think that part of the choice on whether we choose to make money or not comes to a discussion we all probably need to have and haven't had yet about what our role as a city is as an electric supplier. Is our goal simply to give our citizens the cheapest possible electric power, or do we want to charge a little bit more for that and roll those extra funds into some other program, whatever it might be? At this point, I have to say, I personally feel like we should simply provide utilities at the cheapest possible price we can. We as a city cannot go out and, I guess, build things and bring economic development that way, but we can, through the provision of our electrical services, make it more affordable for people to live and do business here. So that's sort of the approach that I take when I think about utility rates. We should keep them as low as possible to encourage growth and investment, rather than utilizing that as a means for the city to make money.
But there's more than one side to your question.
Yeah.
That also in the equation of selling more, if we sell more renewable energy, we're doing our community well. If we sell more fossil fuel energy, we're not doing our world a favor. And so there's kind of that policy decision, and council, before these guys came on board, has had some of these discussions, and it's an ongoing conversation, but our policy has always been to seek renewables as much as possible without causing a financial harm to our community. And I think we've done a pretty remarkable job of that. We're the lowest cost utility in Colorado, and that makes it possible for more people to live here, be successful here, and hopefully we're creating an environment where perhaps some desirable kinds of industry would say, wow, that's a really good deal. Not only do we get to live in paradise, but we can afford to. And so, you know, it's not a simple matter of selling more energy. It's what kind of energy is it? And as Matt said, the ability to store energy on site makes some of these transient energy sources far more attractive. If you can take advantage of a sunny day and use solar to collect a lot of energy and put it in a storage device so that it's there when the sun goes down at night or there's a cloudy day, wow. And of course, then as an emergency backup, our electricity has more uptime than most of the other places around. And that's just absolutely a testament to what a great job our guys do. But I have seen it go down as well. And to have some mechanism to say, wow, I can keep my house powered through a device, a battery of sorts, is a real benefit. And so, yeah, there's not that simple answer. Selling more energy can be a good thing if it is good, clean, renewable energy.
And most solar is not stored in batteries because it's so expensive. Batteries are very caustic to try to recycle and get rid of. So there's two sides to it that we have to keep our minds open to. So most of the time it's generated while it's going. That is improving drastically. I think Tesla has made some great strides recently with some batteries that have longer life. So it's early in that life. You know, we still do the balance, as these council members are mentioning, between cost and the environmental concerns. So therefore, again, through our council's direction and our citizens' wishes, you know, we're, as I mentioned earlier, we typically will be about 55% of our power sources are non-carbon emitting sources. Can we move forward and do better? Well, I expect we certainly will attempt to do so.
And Councilwoman Morrison, I wondered if you wanted to add anything to this conversation about what the utility ought to prioritize, if it's costs and or something different.
Yeah, well, it's definitely again a balance, because we do want to attract new business and new people, and we want this to be an affordable place to live, but at the same time we do need to think about the future of our planet and the environment, and we do need to be looking into those renewable resources, I think even more so than we are currently. So it's a balance. I'm learning that new to government, that it's all a balance act. So yeah.
There's a question here.
Yeah, I'm wondering what your guys' attitude is towards carbon pricing as a policy tool to incentivize the transition away from fossil fuel generation, mostly coal, towards more renewables and making them more cost competitive on that market. And you could also touch on, I guess it's kind of a two-part question, but what your guys' attitude is in the Clean Power Plan and how that would affect you as utility managers.
Boy, have you been practicing to be a TV news Well, the carbon tax is really a controversial issue, and I'll wager that each of us has a little different perspective on that. My take on it is that that's not the preferred path in my mind. I think our community benefits when we find ways to accomplish those same goals without penalizing people. If we can get from here to there without having to pay more, then we've helped our citizens. And I base that on, I'm pretty familiar with the folks who live in Gunnison, and I would dare say that you folks and those of us up here, we are among the more affluent portion of Gunnison. When you go out into our community and you really get to know the people who live in the town of Gunnison, there are a significant number of people who aren't absolutely sure where their next meal is coming from. We have a service-based workforce that lives here in Gunnison that supports tourism, supports the ski industry, supports a lot of the things that are what our community are. And those people are struggling to pay their electric utility bills right now. And yet they're a significant portion of our community. What is it? Nearly half the kids in our public schools qualify for free and reduced meals. That just to give you an indicator of the economic picture of our community. And so, yeah, I want to see the same goal, the end point, but my position is that I want us to find a way to get there without having to penalize the people who are paying the bills. And I think we can incentivize industry. I think we keep negotiating for more and better ways of non-carbon emitting energy. And I think that is my preferred path to the future. And, while I'm on the soapbox, I just, probably the neatest, cleanest, most fantastic source of energy we have is hydro. Except go out and try to build a new dam somewhere that people come out of the woodwork. And so, what might seem like a no-brainer really is taxing on your brain. And there's a lot of reasons why new dams, aren't necessarily the best idea. Although I still think with careful consideration, we could have more hydro. And for energy storage, which still addresses your point, but slightly more indirectly, one of the projects that had been considered in this county in the past is a pump back project, where during the daytime when solar energy in particular is quite available, you pump water uphill to a temporary storage facility. And then at night when you need more clean energy, you run it back down through a turbine to generate electricity. Now, I've got some serious questions about how efficient that is, but that was a genuine proposal on the table not that long ago in Gunnison County. And a refinement of that idea might be possible. Just you heard from me. My position is let's make it work for all of our community, not just those who can afford it.
And just so you know where I'd like to take the conversation, I want to come back to the changes to wind and solar policies, but if you want to first answer the question about carbon pricing, you're certainly welcome to.
I usually stay out of politics, except that when I'm over at the power meetings as the director, I have these conversations, and we just had this recently. So as opposed to being agreeing or disagreeing, maybe I'll just try to give you some facts that I was giving, and then you make your own decisions. I believe the United States produces, it's either 5% or 15% of the world's CO2 emissions. For some reason, I think the speaker said 5%, but I'm not positive. It was a low percentage. The Clean Power Act, which is designed to reduce the United States emissions by 30% by 2030, I believe that's the time frame. If 30% of 5% of the world's CO2 emissions is not very much at a high cost of changing resources. China's putting on a coal-fired plant about every 10 days. So if we reduce 30% of 5% of the world's emissions and by 2030, what effect have we had, and at what cost have we paid to do that? So that's just some information, not necessarily a personal answer for you.
Yeah, and I might add that taking a look at what's happening around the world gives us an opportunity to see other places that have tried some of these things. And I've also noticed that there's an incredible amount of inaccurate information. I saw it on the internet, so it must be true. You all know that, right? And so, one of the fallacies are that the volcanoes on Earth contribute more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere than everybody else. That's really not true, and I've seen some fairly well done research that supports that. They're a contributor, but not like burning coal. One that I've always thought was kind of interesting is that at least some researchers have put forth the notion that there are any number of uncontrolled coal bed fires burning around the world, and they contribute significantly to the CO2 in the atmosphere. And yep, they're a contributor, but again, I don't see the scientific basis that says that. So we are looking at what people do. And Germany has an incredibly strict carbon cap And they've had to go back and build more coal-fired plants because it simply didn't work well. And now they're rethinking, and I'm hoping we're learning from what they're doing. It's perfectly okay to let other people go out and make mistakes and us benefit from it. We don't necessarily have to make them all ourselves.
I think the cap and trade will make some people wealthy and not really get done what we'd like to see happen, is my opinion on that.
I agree with the cap and trade comment, definitely. I think that rather than using carbon credits as a penalty, I think that what we need to do is lean on communities that are more like ours, which are really working to use more renewable energy, and through that purchasing power, industry should then innovate, and that ends up ultimately resulting in more available, cleaner power. I don't think that a penalty is the right way to go. I think what we need to do is encourage that innovation so that we get there.
Invest in technology that is
Reward
going to get us in the right
success.
place.
Reward success.
Yeah.
And conservation is, in my opinion, is still the best and more efficient way to reduce these emissions. If, you know, and the more energy efficient appliances, that sorts of stuff, depending on what each of us can afford, is different for all of us. But conservation efforts would, in my opinion, would far exceed some of the other things that we talk about.
And it's really funny, we're having the same policy discussion in regard to water.
Very true.
Virtually the same topics.
Yep.
And you guys just brought up something that sort of provoked another question before we go to wind and solar policies. You mentioned that consumers need to demand something different, and industry is going to respond to that. But the non-market dynamics of electricity complicate that a little bit. So I'm assuming that Mr. Bradford, that your representation at MEAN is one way where consumers as voters can push for that, can demand something different. Are there other avenues that we can express our demand in a way that industry will respond and innovate, come up with alternatives for us?
Reminds me of CDOT discussion too.
Yeah.
I think this is approaching what's termed nationwide as Public Power Week is coming up, where American Public Power Association, which is municipalities from around the nation, have representation and promote public power. We don't have boards of directors that are on a payroll. We don't have the higher paid executives that you might hear in an independent owned. We don't have stocks where we have to pay dividends back to stockholders. It's all local control, and the local folks are going to go to these folks and express their wishes. These folks are going to come to people like myself and other staff members and say, hey, how can we accomplish this? It's our job then to go out and get these guys the facts. We give cost, we have to, and sometimes we may have those that believe it doesn't matter what it costs. But we have to look at that and at least provide that information so these guys can make an informed decision, and then the general public can be involved in that. Because every time we have a rate setting thing, which can happen yearly, sometimes we'll go a few years, we have public hearings, public notices where the public can not only see these guys on the street like they do all the time, but they can come to city council meeting and express their views at that forum. And that can change things. If a lot of folks come in, these folks are going to tell me, you know what, it costs more, but that's what they want, go do it.
And that's what I encourage all of you to do, is to, keep doing what you're doing, stay informed, be on top of new technologies, new things that are coming, and come to us as individuals, as groups. We meet every Tuesday. The door is always open. We don't often have an audience.
The room is usually empty.
Yeah, the room is usually empty, so come to us. That's the point.
We're going to be there on Tuesday.
Okay,
Great.
we'll see you guys on
and
Tuesday.
I promise you, these guys aren't city council members because they're making a living off what they get paid. Trust me.
And we are probably the most approachable level of government you'll find.
Yeah.
I probably get more community input when I go to the grocery store or walk downtown than any other level of government. And so we are very approachable, but we're also the bottom layer of government. But yet, each and every one of you has an opportunity. The governor was here just recently. Our United States senators and representatives come to Gunnison. you know, when they do, watch for the announcement. Go look them straight in the eye and tell them what you think. Because, you know, even though they may not always want to hear it, what you all think is really important to every elected official. And I like to say that once you're elected to office, party politics really ought to take a back seat, and you now represent everybody in your jurisdiction, not just those that voted for you. And so it's always really important to hear from all of your constituents, whether that you happen to agree with them or not. And I think that's how we make the best decisions, and that needs to work its way higher and higher up through our system of government.
And our city staff, and our council encourages our city staff to be approachable as well. So at any time, whether it's a one-on-one, something comes to your mind next week, whatever, you feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to come by and stop and visit with you at the office. If I can't get you the answer, I have contacts for all the years I've done this that I can make a phone call to, rely on to get an answer if because I don't have all the answers. We can certainly provide you with some answers that are correct.
Thank you, Butch, is leaving like a window.
Oh, okay.
One of the other possibilities for now generating power is something that I first learned about from England, but it's utilization of plasma arc systems. And basically what it's using is renewable, but it's a solid waste deposits or a solid waste production. And it cooks it at a very high temperature. And basically the system requires about operation, it requires about a third of what it produces, and the rest goes into the grid. And I think International Falls, Minnesota is looking at this at the moment, and there ought to be an environmental impact statement out there. But it's something capable of coping with some of the local emergencies when other power is out. Because what you're doing is utilizing your landfill.
Mm-hmm.
And in England, what's happening is that it's also a way of reducing the size of your landfill. So you can auger into what had been deposited 30, 40 years ago, and then generate power out of that.
There's one currently, it may be online, if not, it's very near being online. That very technology that you're talking about in Iowa.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't remember the town.
I should know, but I can't.
It's part of our Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska group. There were opportunities to buy attributes from that plant. We have enough of those. I think it's a good project, but it's not grid connected. So I didn't bring that one back for council consideration for the cost of what it was. We do some of that but from various ways, but that's certainly a new technology, if you will, that's coming to where it's more and more feasible for generation of electricity. I agree.
And when it comes to new technologies, there's still an incredible amount of resource being put into fusion. And fusion is still the holy grail of generating energy. You know, it's that E equals MC squared. A very small amount of stuff generates a huge amount of energy, but it needs to be done in a little more friendly way than blowing it up. But you know, there are literally billions of dollars spent in pursuit of that goal as well.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So on the Front Range, there are utility companies that are starting to complain that solar power is starting to tax their system and cause problems on their system. Do you guys foresee that, or are you considering that in the future of Gunnison?
On a large scale, it does create some issues. They can be overcome with in some ways, but a lot of places have had the influx hit them so quickly that they haven't had time to make the adjustments, change equipment, whatever it may be, to be able to handle that inflow of electricity on the system. Hawaii is a very good example. They have, I knew the numbers, I could get them for you if you're interested, but in one place in Hawaii, they had such an influx of solar that it just devastated them for a time of period of how the heck to handle it, and then how to get the backup power in, because there's a cost associated with that. So our power pool that I sit on as a director, as I mentioned a while ago, I'm on a 9-person committee. We'll be talking about those issues and trying to get ahead of the game a little bit and have some game plans in place for that future possibility.
And that brings to mind an important point, just a technical, practical application, if you will. And that is that all these transient energy sources do have a huge impact because we don't have storage. And so wind comes and goes, solar comes and goes on a pretty regular cycle. What does it take to make up the difference? If you're relying heavily on solar or wind and suddenly it goes away, how long does it take to bring a conventional power plant back online? And how do you break that gap? And that's part of the problem I've heard about, is that some of the coal-fired plants, like I'm real familiar with the Navajo Four Corners power plant, they actually keep it hot all the time, whether they're producing energy or not, because that way an engineer can flip a couple of switches and be up to production in an hour or so. If you're starting with a coal plant, was it 72 hours if you really force it?
Oh, from cold start?
Yeah.
If everything went very well.
Yeah, if, in a perfect world.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at nuclear energy, it takes, what, 10 or 15 years to shut one down and another 10 or 15 years to bring it back up? Not much help. So, like it or not, if you're using nuclear energy, it pretty much needs to be online all the time.
The schedulers for power, and they're in different parts of the country. We're involved in that. We don't do the scheduling. We don't have people sitting here 24 hours a day monitoring loads and being able to say, oh, I need another 50,000 kilowatt hours or whatever, because that changes often. There's a lot of fines involved if you schedule incorrectly. We do want the power company to do this scheduling. These guys do this day in, day out, so they know what the base load is for a large area. Typically, then they see what the weather is. They have years and years of data. So as Stu mentioned, there may be, this won't be the exact number, but let's say there's 4 power generating plants operating on a particular section of a grid. 3 of those are taking care of the base load because they know what it is. When that starts fluctuating up and down, that 4th unit is sitting there running, as Stu mentioned, and that one is going to react to what the amperages and the voltages are as they change, and it'll ramp up and down. So that's kind of a simple explanation of how that works.
And finally, let's hear a little bit about the proposed changes affecting wind and solar.
From a legal standpoint, because of our size, there are no state or federal requirements that the city of Gunnison has a time of use option or photovoltaic wind policy to allow customers to generate their own power. We're under no federal or state obligation to do that. The state requirement is 5,000 customers or more. What's that? Well, that's customers.
Yeah, customers.
It's not meters.
Oh.
So, we have 4,200 meters, but we may not have but 3,800 customers because you have multiple meters.
Right.
So we're under no requirement, but we believe our community wants to see those options, and we've heard that. Our counselors have heard that, and through the years instructed us as staff to develop programs. So 10 or 12 years ago again, the city council at the time, is probably 12 or 15 years ago, with a photovoltaic wind policy, which we implemented. We limited it to the first 50 customers because we didn't know where it was going or what it would do to us, and we needed some time to plan if it went to that level. It has not done so. I believe we have 3 to 5 that have been in photovoltaics in that 12-15 year period. So it's very small. Yeah, we did not allow commercial customers, again, at the time, to participate. As we have moved forward, and let me back up a minute, we had a maximum of 10 kW, that's sizing of the solar at your house. That's what our maximum was, and currently is, up until an F council chooses to change that next week. So as we looked at what the state required of those have 5,000 or more customers. Did a little research on that, and they required commercial customers to be allowed to do that as well as residential. Their limits were 10 kW on a residential and 25 kW on a commercial. So that's the state requirement if you're a utility serving more than 5,000 customers. City of Gunnison really has always done more than what the state requirements are, because that's what our citizens and council direct us to do. And that's also why we're not regulated from the state legislatures, because when those things come up, we have folks that, through organizations, that go to our elected officials on the state level and federal and say, guys, here's what our public-owned utilities and local control places are doing. And they use Gunnison a lot of times as one of those towns when they're making those, they're lobbyists, quite frankly. That's what they'll show them, what Gunnison's doing, Aspen's doing, others are doing. And they're doing more than you're going to be required. And they have been doing it a long time. So that's, I think, a good thing, and a good thing for our community. These local control can do what we want. So what we're proposing is to expand that program offering to commercial customers as well as residentials, and increase the KW size to 25 kW either way, whether you're residential, commercial. If you want to put that capital investment in, if it works for you, then we are suggesting that we allow that to happen. We removed the 50-person maximum from that. I hope it doesn't come back to bite us, as you mentioned earlier. Some are seeing some things. We'll work through it. Again, we're hoping to be ahead of that game. So we're proposing that. There is another change being proposed. Initially, we didn't see that we had a lot of interest. We had some interest. So we pay back any power that you don't use on those early customers at the retail rate. They're very small. They put very little back to our system. On a large scale, then that changes to a generation operation. So we're buying power against our contract on a large scale. But what we would propose, are proposing on that, is to go to 25 kW if the customer so choose. What that customer does not use comes back on the system, we'll meter and pay that back at our wholesale, blended wholesale rate for the year.
And how do those compare, the retail versus wholesale rates?
Our retail rate is, on a residential, is about, I think we structured this for the same rate to all the photovoltaic or wind. We have no wind. So we don't have enough wind in Gunnison for that to be feasible. But it's, say, 7.5 cents kilowatt hour. That's not exactly right. That's real close to what we're charging currently. Our wholesale cost is probably going to be, we blend it all together, it's going to be less than 4 cents, maybe 3.5 cents is my guess at this point. That'll fluctuate depending on, because I believe we'll blend all of our resources, are less expensive and are more expensive. And then our concern is that we don't ask Mr. Schwartz here to subsidize me if I choose to put in solar and I'm reaping the benefits. I'm getting the 30% tax reduction, so I've got some money up front to help pay for the solar. But Mr. Schwartz is not in agreement with that. But as long as it doesn't cost him anything, he probably doesn't care. But he's probably going to come to the city and say, wait a minute, you're making me pay an extra penny or 2 pennies a kilowatt hour because tax over there wants to do a solar thing. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. And then we have a thing called loss of revenues, of course. And some people don't like this, but say, well, if you're going back on the system, we still have to maintain the system to get to you. And that, we still have to have that system to allow your power to come back. So we're maintaining it just like anybody else. So we have some concerns, and we try to make it as fair and give all the facts we can to these guys for their decisions.
And financially, on a large scale, and as you mentioned on the Front Range, there are issues. That's something that we, I think, really have to pay attention to, is if we are, instead of collecting revenues from an electric customer, instead paying them for generation, we not only lose the revenue side, and if we're paying them at retail rates, we're actually paying more for their electricity, But there's also the maintenance and operations side that we're no longer obtaining dollars for, and yet we're still providing to that person. So at this rate, with the number of users we have, it's really not a significant cost, but it could very quickly become an important issue if you run into numerous people and having to make equipment replacements, and suddenly we're paying for equipment to deal with the issue, and we're paying for the power they generated, and we've lost the revenue. That could be a very large swing on a budgetary side that we have to be cognizant of.
And you'll hear a term called stranded cost in some arenas, and that refers to what Matt is talking about here. We still have to have X number of linemen to fix the power, whether it's going to your house or coming out. A transformer that takes the voltage and reduces it till you can use it at home. That same transformer then has to be there to take that power you're generating at, say, 110 volts. Now it's got to move it up to 12,000 volts to be on the other line. So we still have to address those cost issues. Therefore, as time goes by, if it got to be on a much larger scale, we'd probably have to adjust, come back to the council members and say, here's what's going on, give them those costs, and try to keep it as fair and operationally functional as we can. We don't want it taking down our system and taking out all our power. So we have a lot of things to consider.
When we are working on policy decisions, the infrastructure that we own is an incredibly important factor. And it's not just the electric distribution system. There's a water distribution system. There's a wastewater collection system. And then you can go on and talk about streets and surface structures and things. But think about what it takes to deliver power to each and every house in Gunnison. There are lots of lines, some above ground, some below ground. The transformers Tex mentioned step up and step down voltage to make sure that there are necessary amount of currents there. And I know we've had some discussions, council members have questioned, why do we keep $1 million in reserve in the electric fund? But if a substation suffers a major failure, how long are you willing to live without electricity until we can afford to save up and buy another transformer? We need to be able to restore power to our community quickly. Even the hospital can only run for a certain length of time on emergency generation, and then we need to get power back, or it's going to affect people in a really bad way.
We have 3 of those large transformers Stu's mentioning in these substations. We replaced one 12 years ago. At the time, with the associated equipment, and it failed right away. I got to go to Temple, Texas many times over that one with an attorney and others. But we had about $500,000 in that one.
12 years ago.
Unfortunately, it's a WAPA or is it Tri-State has a transformer on a trailer that can be wheeled in when needed.
We made a loan from WAPA.
Yeah, WAPA, that's what I thought.
For a back.
I've seen it, it's quite an
Yes.
impressive thing. So, there's a lot that goes into policy decisions other than just what it costs and what we get back for it. And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, so you mentioned the whole battery storage and what's going on with Tesla in California.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's come from that too is this big movement of customers simply saying goodbye to their utilities, because now with enough storage and efficiency in their home and solar panels on the roof, they can actually generate enough power for themselves to be self-sufficient. Do you see that happening potentially out here with better incentives for solar on roofs and potentially storage in homes? And as a director of a utility, does this scare you? Does this movement towards self-generation, self-sufficiency in power, how do you see that playing out?
Let me real quick say that I know one gentleman who owns a lot in the Vantal subdivision who plans to build an unconnected home in the next year or two.
In Gunnison County, I know a whole lot of people that live
A lot of
totally
folks
off grid.
who live completely off the grid
And
here.
they're very successful.
That's true.
at it. So
It's going to come. It's going to happen. Me personally, I think it would be great if we got to the point where the city of Gunnison didn't have to be a utility provider anymore, and everybody was able to do that. That would mean that we were using 100% renewable energy. That's a very long process, and we in the interim have to continue to manage our utility as it stands and be prepared for those changes to come, hopefully slowly, so that we don't have to make real rapid decisions and
Yeah,
changes.
because if we're in a 30-year contract, then
get
we're in
into trouble.
And
The
that
price
would
of that
mean
outcome.
that the remaining customers that were not able to get off the grid, they would have to share that cost among a smaller group of people. That could be a serious.
That would be the concern. Your question, no, I'm not scared of it. I'm a little different than what you might think. If people choose to do that and can do that lifestyle, that's your call. What happens then to the rest of the customers? Well, it's a concern, as these are mentioned. It could be a cost implication way down the road, but you deal with it as you come back and try to address
And
it.
getting from here to there is the biggie. That up to a certain point, maybe we can absorb it without any big deal, but that as fewer and fewer people have to pay the cost of the infrastructure that you have to have, no matter what, their cost is going to skyrocket. And that's where we start to see our community suffer, because those who can afford to put it in are having a huge impact on those who can't afford it. And
That rather than a carbon credit becomes the incentive for those people to move from the city grid to a standalone electrical
And
system.
before we go, just one quick last thing for these guys. When that happens, I think we have a policy that's in place that requires the city residents to be connected to our power, so we'll have to look at that.
Right.
Interesting.
From the way back.
We'll
But this
have to look
dynamic
at
that
that
we're
one,
talking
yeah.
about
They
is
can
sometimes
check.
referred to as the utility death spiral. We'll talk about this a little later in the semester, but I see Suzanne had a question.
So I think the thing is, I have lived off-grid, and it's really expensive, and it's a lot of work, and that's why many people don't. And so the solution is for us as a community, as a country, to go more and more to large-scale renewable energy, which is exactly what we're talking about. And that we support the grid system with renewable distributed power. And on that, I kind of have two questions. One is what the FERC decision on the Delta Montrose case, how that affects you guys in your 30-year contract in terms of, I believe you, and please correct me if this is wrong, that you can buy 5% electricity outside of that contract, is that?
We can, that's one of the things that we're discussing on the committee that I'm participating on.
Uh-huh.
What the unspoken word is through MEAN has been more in the 2 to 3%
Okay.
range. We're looking
Right.
at that.
So, and what my understanding is that FERC ruling said that, that in fact, despite the contract, that you may be required to buy more renewable energy. And in connection with that, for example, I know that the university has quite a kitty put together to do renewable energy here, which would be obviously far larger than 24 or 25 kilowatts. How could those things play together in a collaborative way with you to create a really model for, for the city, for the county, for the university, for the state?
Western is a little different than our other customers, if you will. Western has a contract with the city of Gunnison, a purchase power contract, similar to what Gunnison's purchase power contract is with the Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska. It follows it very closely because we, as a city, look at Western's load when we're doing our load forecast and when we're going out to make these long-term power purchases so we can have power.
Right.
So we'll have those discussions. What could happen is if Western wanted to do something larger than 25 kW, being state agency, if you will, maybe that can happen. Where the difficulty would become is if Western wanted to sell excess power back to the city, which we're not allowed to do. And this is a very similar issue that we are addressing over at the Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska on this committee, is a town in Iowa, a school, is putting 750 kW in. And well, they put it on hold for now because they didn't realize, remember, we can't do that because they have a contract with me. So, and then what their intent is to build it larger than what they use, sell the power back to the city to make money at the school district, which makes a perfect business sense, but the city is not allowed to buy that power. So we're struggling through that, how to address it, and so, what you're saying is a good example of that, and we'll be kicking those things around over the next several months probably.
And I hate to stop us there, but it's 4:45. I know some of you need to go. If you're able to hang out for another couple minutes, I'm sure some people will have questions, but we certainly understand if you can't. Thank you so much for joining us.
I have a copy for 608 students of the High Country News that you can pick up on your way out, and my 611, remember that we're meeting here in 15 minutes.
Okay.
I have one quick question for you guys. What is the best means of communication between the city of Gunnison and you?
Don't use Blackboard.
Pony Express is not working.
Pony Express is out.
Social media.
What
I think
platform?
social, like a Facebook. Everyone uses Facebook.
And I have one idea we have. So this is just the second year of our program, and most of these students are just starting in the second year. But last year, a few of our grad students started these MEM forums. Hopefully you've heard of them before. So over the course of last year, there were 4 or 5 of these forums that were designed to connect us with the community, share what we know, what we're interested in, and I think that those are going to continue. So we will give you a special invitation to those. You're always welcome. Other ideas, other events that you guys know about, ways to connect?
That's it, just Facebook, huh?
This is a great one.
I think we have that.
Yeah.
We do, but and
Please
I'm
become
working
friends
on
with the city of
that
Gunnison.
piece between, out from the city
On
out.
that
So
note,
that's
I'll
why.
give you guys my card.
Thank you.
If you have ideas for how we can get to know you more, other than coming to the public hearing, please let us know too.
We're happy to come here. This
Awesome.
opportunity is just great.
Great.
Thanks.
All right.